Okay. Tara, good to have you with us tonight. Glad you're here. And we can remember Amy, who's in school doing an internship clinical thing in the evenings. Clinical isn't the right word, but
back at 9 o'clock.
yeah. So Amy's out with her school responsibilities. So let's go to Ecclesiastes chapter 11, and we'll read the last two verses. And then we'll pick up some of chapter 12 as well. We'll go through verse 8. So that's 10 verses, I think. And Tara, why don't you kick us off with verse 9 of chapter 11? How about that?
Rejoice, young man, during your childhood, and let your heart be pleasant during the days of
Thy youth.
Maybe. You lose your place.
I think I did.
It's okay. Verse 9.
A young man can and follow the impulse of your heart and the desire of your eyes, yet know that God will bring you judgment for all these things. So remove grief and anger from your heart and put away pain from your body, cause childhood and the prime of life are fleeting.
Okay, good. One and got a pen here if you.
Yeah, I just remembered where.
I saw them there.
Might need them.
Well,
All right.
I just wanted to, I mean, that word impulse is so much better than what's here as far as understanding.
1 and 2, less of 12.
All right. Don't let the excitement of your youth cause you to forget your creator. Honor him with your youth before you grow old and say, life is not pleasant anymore. Remember him before the light of the sun, moon, and stars dim your old eyes, and rain clouds continually darken the sky.
3 and 4.
And how many?
3 and 4 is fine.
3 and 4.
3 and 4 of 12.
In the day when the keepers of the house shall tremble, and the strong men shall bow themselves, and the grinders, oh dear, and the grinders cease because they are few, and those that look out of the window be darkened, and the doors shall be shut in the streets. When the sound of the grinding is low, and he shall rise up in the voice of the bird, and all the daughters of music shall be brought low.
Also, when they shall be afraid of that which is high, and fear shall be in the way, and the almond tree shall flourish, and the grasshopper shall be a burden, and desire shall fail, because man goeth to his long home, and the mourners go about the streets. Or ever the silver cord be loosed, or the golden bowl be broken, or the pitcher be broken at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the cistern. Then shall the dust return to the earth as it was, and the spirit shall return unto God who gave it. Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher, all is vanity.
Wow. Maybe it's good Judy wasn't here.
That
Yeah,
Says she's kind of down.
yeah.
Yeah.
You've got among other things, a description of old age here in the passage,
Losing the grinders,
right?
not being able to see out the window,
Yeah.
going to the longhouse, never to be seen again.
Right.
Okay. Well, we got started with verses 9 and 10 last week. And we spent some time at the beginning of verse 9. Rejoice, O young man, in thy youth, and let thy heart cheer thee in the days of thy youth. And I think we had some good discussion about that from the standpoint of this isn't necessarily a bad thing that's being discussed here.
Right.
And we just I think we continually need to do this, but maybe you're better at it than I am, but to remember, wait a minute, it's good to do right. And doing right and being a Christian doesn't mean we are not happy or we shouldn't be happy. Sometimes we may acquire an idea that, well, there's lots of fun I can't have as a Christian, but it's, worth it in the end, even though I don't get to do all the fun things that other people do. Well, that's not right. That's just not right. And so when verse 9 says, rejoice and let thy heart cheer thee, that isn't necessarily saying go throw wild parties and live a wild, profligate, sensual life. The life of godliness is a life of joy. Joy is a fruit of the Spirit. So we don't want to read these verses and come to the conclusion, Solomon's saying, hey, if you're going to go live your life, but remember, you're going to be judged for it in the end.
Right.
So that's about where we were last week. And I just want to ask what you think of that in the middle of verse 9, where it talks about the impulse or the ways of thine heart and the sight of thine eyes. How do you have any comments or any input? How does that strike you?
Well, my first thought is, if you're dealing with a Christian, in this case, a godly person who was following Jehovah, looking forward to Christ, but as a Christian, he's telling us to rejoice, and that you can do it when you're young. You have more strength, you have more energy, you have a quicker brain, better eyes, more opportunities perhaps to get out and not party, rather to get out and be a witness, both vocally, but also in helping people and doing things for other people. Before you're burdened down with your own life, your own family and children and grandparents, and before you're burdened down with all of those things, as a young person, you have time and opportunity. It's like in Corinthians where he says that marriage is good, but being single, you have a lot more opportunities.
Okay.
So I think that's kind of what it's saying here.
Okay. The middle of verse 9, walk in the ways of thine heart and in the sight of thine eyes. And then the end, but know thou that for all these things God will bring thee into judgment. It raises a little bit of a question in my mind. Is this a good thing to walk in the ways of your heart and the sight of your eyes?
It depends on if you're looking, which way you're looking at it. When I first read that, I thought of the judges. And the key phrase in there, everybody did
Right.
right in their own eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And the Bible doesn't tell us to follow our own heart,
Mm-hmm.
but rather
Mhm.
to, the heart is deceitful above all and desperately wicked.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe I would take it more of a sarcastic type thing where he's saying,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, do this, and you're going to be judged for that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't waste your opportunities.
Right? Don't squander your opportunities as a young man.
Mm-hmm.
Just like in the New Testament where we stand before the judgment seat.
Right.
Where God weighs the gold, the silver, and the
Right,
dust and
precious,
so on.
right.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
1 Corinthians
something.
3.
So when you look at that, I want to say that he's saying it more of a sarcastic tone and saying, cynically saying, okay, yeah, you can go ahead and do this.
Uh-huh.
But you're going to be judged for that.
Uh-huh.
So take advantage of what you can do when you're young, and don't go into those things that would cause you to stumble,
Yep.
Live your life godly. You won't miss these things.
I just wanted to contrast two passages. The one you've given would work very adequately at the end of Judges. There was no king in Israel. Everybody did what was right in their own eyes. That kind of language is used in other places as well. One of them is Numbers chapter 15, verse 39, where it says that the Israelites were to wear a certain kind of garment. They had to have something on their clothing.
Right.
And it says in Numbers 15:39, it shall be unto you for a fringe, that ye may look upon it like a reminder. They were supposed to wear in their clothing a reminder and remember all the commandments of the Lord and do them, that ye seek not after your own heart and your own eyes.
Right. Right.
After which you used to go a whoring. This led you to unfaithfulness. In other words, unfaithfulness to God, because you sought after your own heart and your own eyes. There might be a little bit of a counterpart to that in a passage like Psalm 37:4. Delight yourself also in the Lord, and he shall give you the desires of thy heart.
Yeah.
So maybe you can see it from both perspectives. It might depend on what's in our heart. If it's our own heart, if our heart isn't directed towards the Lord,
Right.
yeah, that's it. This would be a cynical statement. On the other hand, if we're seeking the right kind of joy and the right kind of satisfaction, living in light of God and his truth and his word, then maybe there's something here that's not quite so negative. I think we've got to be really careful, though, because we don't want to look at a passage and say, oh, look, the Bible tells me to just do whatever I want.
Right.
If you're superficial with this, you could reach that conclusion. Do what you want. God's going to judge me. Okay. But at the end of the day, if I want it, I'll do it. No, I don't. That would definitely be the wrong conclusion to draw. But you do have.
Yeah, I think too here when it says remove sorrow, many Christian young people, both teenagers and young adults, I think sometimes they get in this thing that I can't have any fun. My life's just going to be, oh, I'm going to church and being a good little choir boy or whatever the word is.
Mm-hmm.
And he's saying, don't do that. He's saying, don't be sorrow about that. Don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be joy.
Mm-hmm.
And so it should be an encouragement to those young people not to look like they're missing something.
Yeah. One author that I was reading from at the end of verse 9 says that there seems to be a contrast in verse 9. Okay, live this way, but remember, God's going to judge you. You can see that as not necessarily a contrasting statement, but almost as an encouragement. And if you take the verse more positively, live for the Lord, seek the right kind of happiness, keep your life right and your heart right, remember, in the end, God's going to know that.
Right.
That's like in that judgment that I mentioned.
Right.
People are going to be, some people are going to be condemned verbally, not condemned like to hell, but sorrowful when they're before God. Others he's going to really encourage and commend, and it's not necessarily the big name preachers. It's going to be the missionaries who were out there and those little old ladies who may have been praying or whatever. So he's saying, I think he's also saying that to them, to
Yeah.
young people.
There's a truth here that was helpful to me, and I'll try to share it to bring it out. Trials and troubles can affect us spiritually. And even in Ecclesiastes, you can read a little bit about some of those kinds of circumstances. There's oppression, there's injustice in the world. And you can end up drawing a conclusion if you look around or see how things seem to be happening. We can end up cynical and jaded and throwing away what really matters because of how unfair life seems to be, how unjust certain situations are. We can end up cynical, arrogant, jaded. So here's a quote. One can afford to be cheerful, even amid oppression and trouble, if the time is short and a day coming in which wrong shall be righted and worth acknowledged and faithfulness rewarded. So you almost can see that in this verse. Rejoice and be cheerful and live right. And why? Well, God's going to judge it all. And so it'll pay off in the end.
It's all gonna be
Life
right.
might not seem that, like, it might not seem, if you just look around you at the world, that that's the case, but it really is true. So that's an interesting way to look at the verse, and maybe God's judgment is almost an encouragement, not a warning.
Right.
However we interpret the different statements there in verse 9, rejoice, let your heart cheer you, walk in the ways of your heart, know that God is going to judge, you get to the same conclusion in verse 10. You get the same result. Because of these things, remove sorrow from your heart. Put away evil from your flesh. For childhood and youth are vanity. So there's definitely, this is addressed to the younger generation. You've got young man in verse 9 at the beginning of verse 9, and you've got childhood and youth closing verse 10. So this is instruction to the next generation, but to live in a certain way. It's interesting to note in verse 10, we have two different words: remove sorrow from your heart and put away evil, or there's another word, pain. Evil or pain. And I think it's very helpful just to think about those two things being connected. What causes pain? Well, I mean, we have aging. I'm not talking about the physical process of aging, but spiritually, sin.
Yeah. And ultimately, pain comes from sin.
Yeah. All of it
Sin
does.
is
Oh,
death.
yes. We can't stop the aging process, but morally speaking, there is instruction given here about how young people are supposed to live. And you can think about, and many people have noted the rise of anxiety, of depression, of suicide in teenagers. And that has something to do with lifestyles. Not to be judgmental here, it could be people they're around that are really influencing them, not to be too picky here, but in general, the existence of all that has to do with the lifestyles that go against the counsel that's being given here in verses 9 and 10.
The hopelessness if you don't know God is real.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. This is rejoice and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Well, that's not depression, anxiety, and suicide. And neither is it remove sorrow from your heart, put away evil from your flesh. So there are opportunities in youth, there are opportunities for teenagers and young adults to do things, to grow, to mature, and the instruction is to take advantage of that time. And that continues right into chapter 12, verse 1. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth. So I want to call our attention to a cross reference real quick. Mrs. Ross, did you have something?
Only someplace in the discussion, it wasn't here, but it was mentioned, I think. The Old Testament seems to be filled with symbols of being a believer in God, from the fringes around their clothes
Mm-hmm.
to the doorpost,
Mm-hmm.
written, the commandments written there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it would be not profitable tonight, but it would be an interesting study to take over. And I mean, the 10 commandments are written. You look at the tabernacle, the temple, and all the symbols.
Mm-hmm.
How does that, and does it carry over into the New Testament?
Mm-hmm.
How do those young people out there who may have seen the things in the Old Testament, what do they have today that reminds them of God and of God's commands? Just be an interesting thought study.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let's look at 1 Corinthians, thinking about verse 10. Put away sorrow and pain and evil from your flesh, sorrow from your heart, evil from your flesh. 1 Corinthians chapter 6 has a great, 2 Corinthians. I wrote first in my notes, but it's second. 2 Corinthians 6. And let's just read around the room. We'll close with this passage tonight, I think, or at least in a few minutes. But Tara, we'll start with you again, 14, and we'll read down through chapter 7, verse 1. You can just read a verse at a time if you want. Verse 14, Tara. 2 Corinthians 6:14. Yeah, a minute to get there, that's fine.
You got itty bitty stuff there.
Yeah.
That's one. What? Can't even see it. 12.
You want 6,
2 Corinthians
Oh,
6.
6. Why am I going?
12, 6,
Go
12.
back that way.
That's why you're going 12, 6, 12.
You got it now, Tara. 2
One.
Corinthians chapter 6.
Yeah.
Now pick it up in verse 14, please. Be ye not, or something like that.
Why says do not be
Yeah.
bound
Yep, that's it.
together with unbelievers, for what partnership have righteousness and wellness, or what fellowship has light with darkness?
All right, 15, Brother Les.
And what concord hath Christ with Belial? Or what part hath he that believeth with an infidel?
And what agreement hath the temple of God with idols? For ye are the temple of the living God. For God hath said, I will dwell in them and walk in them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people.
Wherefore come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you. And I'll just keep reading. And will be a father unto you, and ye shall be my sons and daughters, saith the Lord Almighty. So just to recap this passage real quick, you've got instruction given about being unequally yoked or being bound together with the wrong kind of person, with the wrong people. And you get the idea of relationships and close relationships with people who we have nothing in common with. Don't do that. We think of the context of marriage, that would be included here, but it's not the only kind of relationship that's in view necessarily.
Even dating.
Dating, sure. Yeah. You know, business partnership would be another thing. Roommate, you know,
College, yeah.
college
They get to
kids,
choose now.
yeah. You deal with all of this depending on your situation in life. So, and that, you know, that's not an exhaustive list, but you just think about these kind of things. And there's reasons given, because you're trying to put together righteousness and unrighteousness. There's an animosity, there's a separation. This is oil and water. It doesn't mix. The Lord and the devil are not on speaking terms. You know, they're not. Faithfulness and unfaithfulness. He that believeth with an infidel, the temple of God and idols. And we are the temple of God. Paul has already taught that in Corinthians, in his letters to these people. All right, so there's this instruction to, hey, you know, come out, be separate, touch not the unclean thing. All right, chapter 7, verse 1, here's where we're going. Having therefore these promises, dearly beloved, let us, it's very similar language to Ecclesiastes, let us cleanse ourselves from all filthiness of the flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of God. So that's a very pointed instruction. It's very similar to Ecclesiastes. The reasons given are different. In Ecclesiastes, it's about life and youth and your opportunity to take advantage of the time you have, use it. If you live a miserable life as a teenager or a young adult, what's the rest of your life going to be like? You know, where are you headed in life if this is how you live? That's kind of the idea. Remove sorrow from your heart and put away evil from your flesh. Why? For childhood and youth are vanity. So don't waste your time. Don't waste your life. Especially when you're young. You only have so much of it. Very similar instruction in 2 Corinthians 7:1. Only the reason given is because of God's promises, who he is. He receives us when we draw near to him. And to draw close to God, we've got to draw apart from certain things. Can't be friends with the world and friends with the Lord at the same time.
Do you know if in this verse 7, if the word cleanse
Mm-hmm.
and the word perfecting,
Mm-hmm.
are these like one-time things, or is this a continuous action?
I'd have to check and see. I don't know offhand.
So you see the importance of it, though. In my mind, that's real important.
Be cleansing ourselves, you mean?
Yeah. Is it something we have to do daily, or is this talking more about one-time salvation?
I-
Even then, we're told to work our salvation, so.
Yeah, this would not be salvation. This would
No.
be Christian living, habits, influences, both flesh and spirit are mentioned here. So things that are fleshly that could be polluting to us, things we touch or drink, taste, or see, the stuff of this world that is polluted or corrupt. But then there's also the matter of our spirits. That would have to do with our attitudes, with our heart, with greed or anger or complaining, those kinds of things.
Well, my thought was there are those groups, and I believe they're Christian, but who feel almost, and we had somebody here one time taught that once you're saved, you're not going to have that battle if you're really saved.
Yeah.
And it was very destructive. He wasn't here long, but he did some teaching.
Yeah.
But if you look at the last part of the verse, I would think that the first part is continuous.
Well, I personally believe it is, but I
it
was
says
wondering it.
perfecting holiness,
Right.
or in other words, keep perfecting.
Well, I
holiness.
only ask because I don't know the Greek and I have no idea what it says, but I
I haven't looked.
I
it
sure
up
believe
personally.
that it's a continuous.
Let's believe that for tonight
Yes.
anyway, and leave that for Pastor Steve to let us know next.
Yeah.
We could look at those verbs, but you get this idea of looking at our life and not saying, well, I'm better than the next guy, but how am I less than perfect?
Right.
Well, I was thinking.
And how can I?
Right, I was relating this back to Ecclesiastes, where he's talking to young men and young women. They often feel like, okay, I got saved and I lived. Oh, I fell deep. Is there any hope? Well, this should be all that hope that they need.
Right.
In answer to them.
Right. Yes.
And I've known a lot of people who, if they fall into sin, because of course Satan is also condemning, but our own spirit's condemning too, then they feel hopeless, like there's no hope. And that again becomes the problem that Ecclesiastes, I think, was addressing.
So we could flip back just to verse 1 of chapter 12 and maybe conclude with this. That those kinds of considerations would be, among others, why you would want to remember the Lord in the days of your youth and not end up with years of a lifestyle or years of habit, years of direction, and having to turn that all around or change all of that. The Lord can give us grace for those things, but the goal should be to start well, to start life well, to get on the right track and not have to, get halfway down or 2/3 or 3/4 of the way down the road of life and then have to realize, I have all of these things in my life that need changed, but to get the direction set. And that, you just think about, a small difference in an angle over time, and you can get very far apart just with a little bit of deviance. Well, if you can try to stay straight how much of a different place will you end up in versus, out in left field somewhere and
And the
over
key-
10, 20, 30 years.
And the key, which is sometimes condemning, is we've got to spend time in the word. I mean, I've got a lot of knowledge, but I first to admit I don't spend the time that I could or would.
Sure,
Um,
sure. So there really is an emphasis here on stewardship of time and priorities for those who are young. But if we go to 2 Corinthians, say, look, doesn't matter what age you are, let's perfect holiness.
Right.
Let's cleanse ourselves of filthiness, because that God blesses us when we draw near to him. So I don't want to emphasize youth too much, but scripture generally says this is the way to live. So we ought to seek to do this in our lives.
And we can find lots of examples in the New Testament, I believe, of believers who, I hate to use the word fell, it sounds bad, but
Mm-hmm,
who came up short,
mm-hmm,
and then God straightened them out.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I think that needs to be really emphasized when you're dealing with young people who may be stuck, fretting about, well, I've tried. I have a brother that I'm constantly asking prayer for, my brother Harold, who lives in Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
I personally believe that he's saved. But he doesn't, because he doesn't live it. And what he keeps saying when you try to talk with him is, well, I've done everything the Bible said to do. I've read it, I know it, I can tell you. He married an unsaved woman, and that unequally yoked,
Yep.
and she's a diehard Catholic. But the problem that he has faced almost all of his life is something I think that's common with our youth and with our young adults today, which is a challenge then for those of us that get the opportunity to teach and preach and be an example, to help them to see. They all, I'm so impressed today, not in the good sense, but in the bad sense, that young people today, by the time they're 15, they think they have to know what they're going to do with their whole lives. Am I going to be a banker? Am I going to be a politician? Am I going to join the military? Am I going to be a teacher, doctor? And they go into college with that in their minds. And then if they don't become what they thought they had to become, they do the same thing. And I don't think that God tells too many people real early on
Right.
what he plans for their whole life.
Right.
And to
If he
do.
did, he would run.
Probably. Probably.
I would have. I would have.
All right, well, let's go ahead and take prayer requests for a few minutes, and we will then head to